Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Univision stage. Now we have a Discover Talk. Is there life after NYC? I introduce Laura Fegley.
Hi, everybody. Did everybody read the disclosure? I'm Laura. I'm a recovering New Yorker and a relapsed Midwesterner. This talk's gonna be a little bit different from some of the other talks you might see today. I'm not gonna be talking about data or digital or direct-to-consumer. I'm going to talk about something a little bit more personal, but I think it's fundamental to what we all think about, which is where can I live to do what I love? So my life in my story in 15 seconds. I grew up in Ohio, but I moved to New York in the mid-90s to take a job as a copywriter. Just for a little context, for those of you following New York real estate, this was the rent check on my very first apartment in Chelsea. That's no roommates. Things have changed a little bit. Shit's gotten real. And then I stayed in New York for 20 years. I either worked or freelanced at probably almost every agency in the city. I was going to be this woman. I was never leaving New York City. New York was where the best and the brightest were, and it was the center of advertising, and I didn't see why I should ever leave. And then a little over 2 years ago, a friend of mine said I had to meet the CEO of a mid-size agency in Minneapolis. And for any of you who have met our CEO, Christine Fruchty, you know she's very persuasive. So next thing I know, I'd kind of fallen in love with this agency named Colle McVoy, and I was packing up my entire life and moving to Minnesota. So what's life like outside the ad mecca? While I was really excited about this opportunity at Colle McVoy, I honestly thought there was a really good chance I was making one of the biggest mistakes in my life. Even though I had lived in one of the most worldly cities in the world, I was a little bit sheltered. I'd only lived in New York. I didn't know what life would be like on the outside again. So these are some of the observations about my life since I've moved. So observation one, did you guys know there are hours at night that people do things other than work? I didn't. When I worked at, my last job in New York was at BBH, and Sir John Hegarty would come to town and he would take time to do one-on-ones with the creative leaders, which was amazing. If you don't know John Hegarty, please Google him. But John would always want to know what hobbies you were into because he felt that it was very important that you had good hobbies and good outside interests to be a great creative. And the reality was, I would kind of make things up for John. I would say, oh, I'm learning to play the ukulele, because the reality is this was my life in New York City. Sorry if it's playing. Basically, it was me coming home, barely being able to drag myself home before I ordered Seamless, passed out on the couch, and then, usually over emails or a call with Asia, which happened quite a few times. And then at Colle McVoy, I think my first week I got really freaked out. This is our agency at 5:30 this week. And unless people are cranking on a project or a pitch, they tend to try to head out around 5:30. And this really freaked me out. I have to admit, these are the questions that went through my mind when I first started. How is the work getting done? Where's the ambition? Quality of life is for suckers. But as I continued to work, I realized everybody was hitting deadlines. Great work was getting done, sometimes better ideas than the work I was seeing coming out of New York. And I had the realization that time at desk did not necessarily equal great work. People at Colle McVoy were able to focus, and I think more importantly, the time at home actually made them do better at their job. So I'm gonna have to get a hobby. If you have any suggestions, please let me know. Observation two, life doesn't have to be so hard. I think this image exemplifies life in New York. This is a stroller either going up or down the steps of the subway. That's something that we all live every day in New York, and I think there's a lot of pride that comes with that. And my first night in Minneapolis, I went to the grocery store, and the guy was bagging up my groceries, and he started taking them away, and I was super confused. And then I realized people take your groceries to your car and put them in your car, and don't take tips for putting them in your car, and you can drive that car into your driveway. And I almost started crying. And the nice thing about normal life things not being so hard is it gives you a little bit more energy for work things to be harder. Observation three, I live more like the people I make ads for. Even though I grew up in the Midwest, I lived here for a really long time. So sometimes I'd have to pull out the Midwest saying if a client asks me, do you really understand what it's like to be a Pittsburgh mother of four who serves lasagna 2 times a week? And I go, yeah. But I really didn't. But now, I still do cool things. Minneapolis has tons of cool things. I still do plenty of cool hipster stuff. But I also go to the state fair, and I go to neighborhood potlucks, and I got a Costco card, like mind blown. I think this very scientific graph kind of represents my transition to Minneapolis, why my kale consumption has gone down precipitously, my tater tot consumption has gone through the roof, my cholesterol's up, but so is my joy. And now I do feel like I'm better positioned to know what's relevant to more people. And I think more importantly, I am better poised to kind of make the stance that middle Americans don't need messages or experiences that are dumbed down. This is a very personal one. Observation 4, children are seen and heard. I knew a creative here once who had a baby, started a new job, and didn't tell anybody she had a new baby because she was worried that she wouldn't get the great assignments. And I don't think that's a real uncommon story. This was kind of how I pictured children when I was in New York. There are children and there are work. The Venn diagram has a really hard time coming together. It wasn't into my late 30s that I could even picture how I would have the time or the money to have children here. In Minneapolis, children are a part of the natural dialogue. This is my Minnesota baby Hugo. Hang on, we gotta pause for oohs and ahs. I won't say it's easy, but I know it's 1,000% easier than it would have been if I had him in New York. And I think us having families be a part of our normal conversations make us better at our jobs. Observation 5, this is a big one. Creativity no longer has a home base. I think we've seen over the last 20 years, agencies proving that you can be a regional agency and still be a national and global powerhouse, Wyden, Crispin, and Martin, for example. But I think what's been really interesting in the last 10 years are there's all these kind of micro markets all over the country that are attracting the most creative people. Some of the best food is happening in Portland, Maine, and Cincinnati, Ohio. Basically, creative people are traveling to where they want to be and then making that their creative mecca. And I think the same goes for advertising. You can make your own mecca. I think because things aren't so set in stone, it's easier to create your new world in places like Minneapolis. So I highly recommend people do that. Observation 6, we could always use more different. In Minneapolis, a lot of people that grow up in Minneapolis either stay in Minneapolis or they go away for a few years and then come back. And I think that says really nice things that people actually want to continue to live there. So that means we have some stereotypes. We do have a lot of Scandinavians in Minnesota. These are some of the Erics at our agency. We also have Swedes and Norwegians, and just to mix things up, we also have a ton of Danes. And that's part of our flavor, and I think that's part of what makes Minnesota unique. But what's really making us great now is we also have a lot of people like Pujum, Rotem, Maria, Alejandro, and there's a guy we have called Jade Bayonet. I just put his name here because it's the best name I've ever heard. But these are people who chose to make Minnesota their home, and their diversity of experiences and perspectives have really taken us to the next level. And we could use more of that. So I think that's the number one thing I think all of us in every city need to look to is how do we get more diversity of experiences and perspectives. And that's not just race and gender, although that's the number one priority for all of us. But I think also getting these better perspectives will help us be better problem solvers for all of our brands in the future. So I had to put this one in here because I think people would come up to me and go, yeah, Minnesota sounds great, and that's great quality of life, but the winters are a real deal killer, aren't they? And I just have to, this is the coldest day I experienced in Minnesota. They happen from time to time, but not that often. But I also wanted to put in, this is my last winter in NYC. This is my neighborhood in Brooklyn. One of those minis on the street is mine, which you can't see because it's covered in snow. So it's not like we don't have winter in a lot of different places, and you have to walk everywhere here, whereas I can get in my nice warm car in Minnesota. But I think more importantly, people embrace winter in Minnesota. This is me ice fishing with one of my teams from work. People get really into the winter sports. And this is the lake near my house where kids ice fish. It's like a Norman Rockwell painting. And I think it's really special when people embrace what's special about their cities, and for us it's winter. And I think it's not one of the things we work around, but one of the things that makes us really cool. Okay, and last but not least, so New York is fucking awesome. I would not have traded my years here for $1 million. The experiences here are next level, so are the people. I think everybody should have to work in New York London or San Francisco at least once in their life, builds a resilience like nowhere else. But there are lots of kinds of awesome. I didn't know if Minnesota was going to work for me and if I was going to work for it, but I feel like I'm a very different and changed person after moving to Minnesota, and I'm better for it. So I'd open everybody to be open to new kinds of awesome. I highly recommend you get as many as you can when you try. Thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, please make your way out of the theatre. We have another session starting shortly.